Hi there, and welcome to the Rethinking the Human Factor podcast with me, your host, Bruce Hallis. It's absolutely fantastic to have you here with us on the show today. For those of you who are new to the show, let me just briefly explain a little bit about the show and the format and where we've come from. So the show is really about the challenges of raising awareness, influencing behaviour, and fostering an appropriate organisational culture where security is truly valued. And the show is one of the outputs of 6 years worth of research that I've been doing into the human factor. And I remember back in the day, sort of like looking at the human factor and sitting back thinking, no, actually, I just really needed to get right to the roots of the human factor. And that was what I called the Rethinking the Human Factor. And that's so I guess the journey that I've been on and that I've been trying to share with the security community over the past 6 years. And this podcast is part of that. Now, one of the earliest lessons that I learned when I kicked off my own research was that the challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture aren't unique to cybersecurity. And I guess in many ways that sort of set my mind in terms of the need for the industry to drop its industry firewall and to reach out to people who had been addressing the challenges of awareness, behaviour and culture in demonstrable and meaningful ways, both from an academic and practitioner's perspective, and asking them to come in the show and to actually share their insights. So that's what I've been doing for years. I've been spending my time trying to identify the right disciplines, thought leaders who could explain their views around those interesting and alternative disciplines to the ones that we see traditionally within cybersecurity, and engaging with them and bring them here on the show to share their insights. And it's been an absolutely exciting journey. It's been something that I've got so much from. So as part of that show, we also invite our listeners in the community around Rethinking the Human Factor to come on. So we ask anybody that's working in education and awareness to come on the show and to share with us what they've learned from the show themselves, but also lessons that they can share with the listeners. And, if you're one of those people, if you'd like to come on the show, then the best way for you to do that is drop me an email at podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Let me repeat that for you, podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Drop me an email. Let me know if you'd like to come on the show. It would be great to have some people on the show. I do know right now that we are looking for somebody to come on the show in, I think it's 3 or 4 episodes time. And then we're looking for somebody after that as well. So yeah, if you want to come on the show, just let us know. Okay. So who do we have on the show today? So back in series 1, we did an interview with a guest. And that interview focused around a subject which was sort of relatively new to me. I'd sort of known of it for a little while, but I never really understood the subject and how it connected to so many other areas where I've been doing research and work in the past 6 years. And this subject was called semiotics. Now, I don't know, put your hand up. Has anybody here heard of semiotics? Now, I've got my hand up because now I have. Back in series 1, I think I was introducing this. When I spoke to a number of listeners, they were like, I'd never heard of semiotics. I'd never heard of Rachel Laws. And but the feedback was they found it really interesting. They found Rachel's energy absolutely amazing. And she really does have a huge amount of energy. And she really knows her subject matter well. And she was able to draw upon lots of anecdotes and lots of, small stories and examples. And I think that's really important to trying to get the message across. So I went out and I got back in contact with Rachel. I said, look, Rachel, we had some really great feedback. Would you like to come back on the show? And she bit my hand off. So here we have her back on the show. So without any further ado, let's get on with the interview. Thank you very much for coming back to have a chat with us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very flattered that people enjoyed it so much.
It was great. So we were sort of, you and I actually had a chat, didn't we? And we were sort of talking about, other initiatives from other industries which are there to sort of help raise awareness and influence behaviour. And I know within my industry, we often talk about health and safety. And we actually had a lady from Singapore called Sui Wong come on, and she's from the health and safety area. But the thing that you and I spoke about, I don't know if it was because we were going on holiday or something, not you and I together, but going off on a separate holidays anyway, okay, was in-flight videos.
Mm.
Now, in-flight videos, I think the reason why we may have come up with this is that I'd been on a flight with my children who were very, very young. And I've got a picture of them and they're just staring at the air stewardess. I mean, they're absolutely transfixed. So she's doing the safety piece at the beginning. And I looked around the rest of the plane and nobody's looking at the stewardesses. And I'm like, it's really quite telling in the sense that people have seen it so many times that they think they know it. And there's nothing new to learn. And it's a real challenge because obviously, in-flight safety is really, really important to airlines. And actually it can make a difference between life and death in circumstances as well. So, I was wondering, what did you think? I mean, we went away and looked at a couple of videos, didn't we? And what were the two that we picked out?
Okay, so I looked at a few actually since we last spoke. And it was clear to me that these airlines are making a huge effort to just get people to pay attention. And there are a couple of airlines in particular that do a terrific job. And I guess if we wanted to sort of pick on the best one, the leader almost, it would be New Zealand Airways, and who just came up with this spectacular and funny video, which is concerned with air passengers who are making a pilgrimage to the place where Lord of the Rings was filmed. And it's a highly engaging film, even if you've never seen Lord of the Rings, which is quite an accomplishment. So that is probably the best one I've seen. I mean, it's really warm and sympathetic, and just beautifully captures the excitement of the tourist who's absolutely immersed in Lord of the Rings and can't wait to get to New Zealand. And they've kind of managed to craft this mythology of Lord of the Rings around all the usual airline instructions about not smoking in the toilets and so forth.
Right.
There have been some of the good examples as well. I watched a really good one that had Sir Ian McKellen and Joanna Lumley and Tandy Newton and various other people. That was also very funny. And that's also, clearly these unexpectedly famous actors appearing in an airline safety video is a terrific way to get attention. So there have been some really good attempts at getting people to watch something that they just don't want to watch. However, I've got to say that before we just start borrowing those techniques and saying, oh, well, there you go, all our problems are solved and I'll just import this knowledge into my business, I want to point out that there's a couple of small problems here as well. So firstly, those things are very expensive to make, okay?
That's a big problem.
That is a big problem. If you're a business owner and you want your staff to start behaving differently around the way that they manage information security, for example, you probably don't have the budget to get Ian McKellen and Joanna Lumley to appear in your instructional video, although that would be awesome. And as a matter of fact, now I think of it, there was also a fantastic video that I saw that is just not going to be achievable for most people, that was made by Burger King. And it was cleverly positioned as a sort of in-house training video that was intended to inform staff about a new type of hot dog that was going on the menu.
Right.
And they managed to get Snoop Dogg to appear in it.
Really?
Unbelievable. So Snoop Dogg appears in this video in this completely casual way, telling people about this new hot dog and showing how to make it. And there are like real Burger King stuff in the background staring at him open mouthed. I just can't believe that he's really there in the building with them. It's terrific. And then, of course, it acted also as a super ad for Burger King because it was leaked out, in inverted commas. It was allowed to leak into the public domain and was then widely circulated on YouTube, and everybody loved it, And it was outstanding. If you want to get people to watch a video about your new type of hot dog, that's how you do it. However, not everybody can afford to get Snoop Dogg on board, okay? So it cost is the first problem.
Yep.
But also, secondly, with regard to the airline safety videos, and I've watched quite a few of them, it was clear to me that the efforts of these videos are entirely geared towards one objective, which is to get people to simply watch the film. And that's great, but that is a separate objective from getting people to do something as a result of having watched the video, like turning off their cell phone. And so some of these videos then are highly entertaining and engaging, and great at getting people to watch the film. But whether you've motivated them to take action as a result of seeing the film is a separate question. And I'm not convinced that the airlines have quite succeeded in doing that.
Okay, right. A couple of really valid points, I think. It's the whole budget thing is a real issue. I mean, you might be able to afford Snoop Dogg, but you might not be able to afford any of the crew and filming equipment needed to actually make the video. But the issue of budget is a critical one to anybody that's going to be listening, and is focused upon security awareness and behaviour. I think the point about engagement is a really good one as well. I've seen some absolutely fantastic video footage. Relatively recently, I was talking to an organisation, and they produced video content, and they were showing me some stuff that they'd done, and it was incredibly slick. It's the sort of thing that I would expect to see on Netflix in terms of the quality and the acting, and then they're layering on all these graphics, etc. And then I asked them, what was the objective behind it? And actually, they did all of that just to promote a discussion. I mean, it was the tool that was used to kick off a range of workshops, which I could see that. But again, it comes back to your earlier point, budget.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, it's also this problem of there being a difference between viewing a film and taking action in pursuit of the film is also quite commonly found in advertising as well, in the sense that there are a lot of really creative people in the ad industry who probably should have been directing feature films. And from time to time, they'll make films which are just undeniably gorgeous and really creative and a pleasure to watch. And they win awards, at Cannes Film Festival and things like that. But then the problem is that consumers can remember the ad and they'll say, oh, yes, that was the one with the paint exploding all over the tower block. It was really amazing. But then if you ask them what was the ad for, they don't know. And actually it was for a high definition TV, but people don't realise that, and then of course they don't go out and buy the TV. So this can be a problem sometimes with advertising that almost becomes a victim of its own success.
Well, is there an argument though that if they remember just the brand,
people couldn't even tell you what category of product it was?
Right, okay. So yeah, I mean, I think I remember the actual because
the one I'm talking about.
I know the one that you're talking about, yeah, and I still know the name of the manufacturer as well. But I think that because we've spoken about it, across my sort of network, or people talking about, how when you, what's your brand strategy? Is it about letting people know about their product, or is it just about letting people know about your brand and what category you actually fall within, so that when they think of, let's say, TVs, that they think of brand X, and therefore they just put the two together and they go and do a search upon brand X because they're looking for it. And I think that's an interesting question for the listeners, is this sense of, if you think about information security, there's this brand piece. You think about what you're communicating to people. How far down do you go? Do you communicate just so that people are aware of the existence of the brand? Do you go further and almost like have your product categories? So, what the brand is associated with. And then the next level would be, the actual details. So are you just trying to make people stop and think and come and speak to you, or make an inquiry on the internet, about security policies or whatever? Or do you actually go that little bit further to try and make them aware of the policy and what to do? And it's that level of detail, if your objectives are getting that detailed, what are the different approaches that you want to take to achieving that? Because really, at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's a pretty simple analogy to think of security as a product. And really what we're talking about here is almost like advertising to an internal market, aren't we?
Right, exactly. That's exactly right, yes. Exactly. And what really successful advertising needs to result in some kind of behaviour change, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It ultimately needs to result in people buying the product or whatever it is, or at least realising that the product exists, and not just saying that was a really amazing ad. I've got no idea what it was for, but it looked lovely.
So with the airline safety videos, the one thing that I picked up, because I've had a look at it, I think Virgin were the first one to come out with anything which sort of really challenged the status quo, and then it seems to me between Virgin and New Zealand, they've pretty much been the inspiration to the airline industry in terms of trying to drive this sort of different way of trying to communicate and at least engage on the particular issue. But New Zealand's got a whole range of videos. So there's the one that you talked about, which was the Hobbit, which is clearly tying into New Zealand's reputation, its own, the nation's brand, and it's associated with, a place where Hobbit was filmed. And so anybody that sort of knows anything about The Hobbit will probably know that's where they did some, if not all of the filming. I don't really know. And so they're leveraging that. But then they also did something with, they called it Bare Basics. And I think there was one with Bear Grylls, who's the head of the Cub Scout movement, who's an ex-SAS soldier who created a whole range of TV programs about him being dropped into remote places and how he had to survive by eating all manner of stuff on the way and causing bodily harm to himself as well. So it's interesting because they've got the Bear Grylls one. Then they've also had the New Zealand rugby team as well, which anybody that's interested in rugby, New Zealand rugby team is world famous. So it's interesting how the airline has seen what New Zealand is famous for, and then built stories around that.
Yes, I can see what you're saying, that it successfully makes a connection between the message and the brand, and that's really valuable. But I still have concerns about how successful those things are in getting people to actually comply with instructions.
I wonder if Air New Zealand has any figures on that.
I would love to know. Yeah,
I think the podcast should reach out and try and find out. I'll try and do that. I'll try and see if I'll be happy to share any information about the success of the campaign. I mean, if you measure success in terms of reputation and what it did for them, and I think for it standing out for anybody that was on the plane, I doubt it wouldn't have succeeded. But the issue is that whilst that enables you to tick a box, did they find that people changed, and in what way did they change? That would be interesting. Anyway, but I think one of the other things for me that showed you with those different Bear Grylls, the New Zealand rugby team, the Hobbit, etc., is that you can't actually rest on your laurels. You've got to keep coming up with new ideas when it comes to even just engaging with people, in that capacity, and people get used to seeing something. And actually, once they've got used to seeing it, they sort of turn off and they disengage. Is that your experience as well? That people sort of get to that point where if they see the same marketing over and over again, does it still engage with them as effectively? Or do you have to ensure that you're sort of feeding innovation in terms of, how things visually look, or even the sound or audio, how people are engaged with, that you've got to keep doing that on a periodical basis?
I think, again, this is something that is well known to the advertising industry. There are a very few ads that people don't seem to get bored with. I almost want to say that some people regard the sort of golden age of TV advertising as having been back in the 70s and 80s, which is why there are British people alive today who can still remember memorable campaigns for things like Hamlet cigars, which had this famous bit of music and this strapline, "Happiness is a cigar called Hamlet." And then there was also the famous Oxo Cube family as well, with Linda Bellingham, which really stuck in people's memories for years. However, not many ads are so impactful that they will stay interesting for that long. And most of the time, people will fairly quickly get to a point where they don't want to give you attention anymore. So even something as, I really love that New Zealand video about the Hobbit. It's just delightful, and it probably withstands being watched several times. But how many times is several? After a certain point, you're going to say, "Okay, well, I've seen this now. I've enjoyed all the jokes. Yeah. I've enjoyed the beautiful landscape, and I still don't want to switch my phone off."
Yeah.
So I think there's this issue of you've got to come up with new stuff to get people's attention, but also just as importantly, you want to get their attention and then make them take action in pursuit of this message. And I think that's the most important thing, right?
Yeah. And I think what we're getting to here is that if you're going to take that approach to sort of trying to raise awareness and influence behaviour by taking this all like film, visual, audio sort of stimulation approach, you've got to keep it fresh. Okay. And keeping it fresh means cost.
Yes.
Okay. And also producing these things actually takes time, not on the sort of scale that New Zealand has done, but even on this relatively small scale, it takes time. We've worked with organisations where they've been looking for that sort of quality of a product, of a film or footage, and sometimes there's an appreciation of how much time it takes from the client end to actually come up with the polished product as well. So it's not just the cost of bringing in, experts who can help you put it all together, but it's also your own time and getting involved in that process as well. So, for me, it's a big budget time challenge, which would beg the question: is there a better way of actually getting what I want in terms of the levels of awareness and hopefully influencing behaviour? Which sort of actually, the influencing behaviour piece, I guess, brings me to something that I'm just wondering if you could share some views upon this. The whole idea of motivations as part of influencing behaviour. It's not unusual for people to say, okay, we want to get people to engage with our internal security communications campaigns, and we're going to offer, a range of prizes. What's your view? Oh dear. Okay. What's your view on the motivation piece, and the whole idea of, trying to tempt people to come and engage with your program because there's something in it for them?
Okay, well, I've got good news for business owners. You don't need to spend money on incentives. They don't work. There was a study in 2016, let me just quickly get the reference for you. It was in an academic journal called Progress in Brain Research by Strang et al. In 2016.
Right.
Okay, if anybody wants to look that one up. And what they found was that, shockingly, is that giving people cash incentives actually makes them less likely to engage in helpful behaviours, which is counterintuitive, right? I mean, at first glance, you would think that everybody wants money, don't they? And therefore, a cash incentive ought to spur them along.
Yeah.
But of course, the whole market research industry is founded on that as well. We're constantly offering people small amounts of money to complete surveys and take part in focus groups. The problem is that when you're trying to get people to engage in behaviours which are, shall we say, beneficial to others, whether that's managing information in a responsible way, or complying with health and safety, or donating to charity, or doing stuff that's useful to other people, these small cash incentives actually reduce the helpful behaviour. So let's think about why that is. Okay, it actually decreases the behaviour. So I have an example of this from my own research experience that explains why this phenomenon would exist. So I went to did some research amongst people who donate blood. And this is something that the vast majority of people don't want to do.
Right.
They are squeamish about it, and it sounds like it's going to be painful and gruesome, and, why would you? So the question then arises of what is different about people who actually do this. So I went to a blood donation centre that was actually kind of a church hall with an NHS van parked outside.
Yeah.
And to interview people who had gone along to give blood to find out what made them special.
Uh-huh.
And I was hired to do this because I have a background in psychology. And I thought, like the people who had hired me, that what I would discover was that this tendency to donate blood would be down to some quirk of their sort of individual psychology, right? Just their individual personality or something.
Yeah.
And what I discovered was greatly to my surprise, actually, was that it wasn't at all about individuals and their internal private thoughts. It was about community. Uh-huh. So in this sort of church hall with all these people sitting around waiting to give blood, giving blood, having a cup of tea and a biscuit afterwards, there was a real, almost tangible atmosphere at this place that was almost like a British wartime mentality.
Right.
And we all know how central that is to British culture and national identity as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
The British people are really proud of how they got through 2 world wars, and it was all about, we'll all pull together and do our bit and be plucky, and it's a real team effort. And this was what I found manifest in this really tangible way at this blood donation place, that there was this very recognisable feeling of teamwork and community spirit, where people were chatting to each other. Some people had brought their kids along. almost to kind of show their kids an example of responsible behaviour and get them integrated into the community. And people were emotionally lifted up and supported by the feeling that this is a group effort, and that we are doing something really significant, not individually, but together. And there was this sense that if we all pull together, we can save the world. So this feeling that you are part of something that's a lot bigger than just you on your own, that can be really motivating. So, if we want to talk about this, there's a whole industry around motivation, okay? And if we want to use the language of that industry, what we're describing here is the difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So your small cash incentive is extrinsic motivation, where you're giving somebody a reward. This is unconnected to the behaviour that you want them to produce. And we know that it doesn't succeed very well. This has been proved lots of times in categories like healthcare, like getting people to exercise more or eat more vegetables. And the same thing has been found as well in the workplace, where there have been attempts to kind of gamify processes that people don't really want to comply with by giving them these game-like systems that award meaningless badges or tell you that you've unlocked an achievement in some way. And this can work for a short time. There's a kind of novelty effect, but it will very quickly wear off. And the reason for that is because these external motivators are just not sufficient to make people keep up with the behaviour change, which can be quite inconvenient and burdensome. And let's face it, there's blood donation is a good example, because as things, as inconvenient and burdensome things go, going out to spend an hour in a church hall donating a pint of blood has got to be high up the list, right?
Absolutely.
So what's been shown to work much better is intrinsic motivation, and that's motivation that comes from within people, or more accurately, from within the project that they are trying to complete. So the blood donors, with their British wartime spirit, they've got high levels of intrinsic motivation. So the motivation comes from within this project. If we all pull together, we can save the world, and not from rewards which are outside of and irrelevant to the project. And if you really think about it, for a person who's really involved in this kind of community effort, this heroic project of we can save humanity by all going to donate blood together, you offer that person a small cash reward. It's kind of insulting, actually. You've almost diminished the reasons why they're there, and you've belittled it, really. So I think this distinction between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation is super, super important. And we need to look for the internal reasons which are internal to the project and capitalise on those.
Really, really, really interesting. My experience is exactly what you've painted as well. That whole incentivizing through things like little prizes, etc., is definitely, in my experience, very short term. And in a way, sometimes when you incentivize and you use really low value prizes, it's almost like putting a value upon the thing that you're trying to incentivize people to change. If they place a low value on it, in the sense of a low financial reward, or it doesn't have to be money, but it could be something that has some value in terms of money.
Yeah, but also you're kind of telling people, you actually have good reasons for not caring about this.
Yeah.
We know you don't care. That's why we're offering you an iPad.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And it's almost kind of endorsing people's feelings of not caring and encouraging them and helping them to believe, yeah, that's right. You're absolutely correct not to care. So here's an iPad, which we hope will make things more interesting for you.
Absolutely. And, from a behavioural science perspective, one of the things that we do understand is that if people think that it is the norm not to engage, hence the reason why we're trying to persuade everybody to engage, then actually people will decide not to engage. So, one of the things that came out through research, I remember a long time ago, there was the sense of, on that behavioural norm is that if people see broken windows, then they think that's the normal behaviour. So what they found, there was a piece of research, I think it was done in the United States, in New York potentially, where they actually found that if broken windows were left up there in plain view, then other people think that was normal to break windows, and they would break windows. Whereas if the city fixed those windows quickly, so it didn't look like there were many broken windows, that actually reduced the number of people that then went on to break windows. And it's that social norm thing. So if you have to incentivize people, if people have to think the security function is trying to incentivize me to take part in this campaign, what does that say about the number of people that are currently taking part in the campaign?
Yes, I tend to agree with you there. Yeah, you need to show that you as an organisation value what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily give you that short-term hit in terms of, being able to report. And this is really important in our industry. So KPIs, quarterly reporting, annual reporting against your risk your risk targets. And it's like, we know that we've engaged X number of people have visited the internet as a result of this campaign that we ran. And, being able to show that's important. I not completely get it, but you really want to be able to show that people are going there because they value security rather than the incentives that come with it. And I often find that incentives actually make up a significant part of the budget that people are actually spending. And you've got to ask yourself the question, in the longer term or medium to long term, would it be better to spend that budget on things which are more, intrinsically motivated, which is the point you make, that it's come from within?
Yes, I think that's really important, because money is a huge issue here. And it doesn't make much sense to allocate large portions of your budget to incentives if all they're going to do is produce a temporary spike and no long-lasting behaviour. Yeah. So again, for people who are seriously interested in this, I would really advise reading this paper by Strang and colleagues in Progress in Brain Research, because it's just the evidence is right there that giving people small incentives to do helpful things actually reduces the helpful behaviour, which is not what we want at all, right? A complete waste of time.
Yeah. Okay, right. Well, I think we've covered that one, haven't we?
Yeah. Sorry, everybody who was about to be given a small cash reward by their employer.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
I do think there is room for it, but I think you need to present that case. If you're head of education and awareness, you need to, and you're thinking about using incentives. I don't think what I'm saying is just don't bother with it. I think you just have to be prepared to actually say to the people that are going to approve your budget, look, this is a short-term fix. Okay, this is going to get, the eyes looking at things, not necessarily all the eyes for sure, but it's a short-term fix. If the organisation has given the education awareness manager the responsibility of influencing, embedding security into the organisational culture, that's never going to be a 1-year thing. It's going to take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And you have to be upfront with the board to say to them, hey, look, we can do these short-term tactical measures now. Incentives have a role to play there. But actually, if we really want behaviour and culture over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then we've got to always understand that at some point the incentives have to drop off, and actually we invest that money in terms of supporting these more important intrinsic interventions that we can design. So I'm always like that. I'm always a bit like, let's not throw out what we've got. Let's just identify the opportunities for improving, and then you take sort of like a dual approach, tactical stuff and then strategic. So I think they can still get some iPads, but maybe reduce the total number of iPads and work upon the scarcity. You see, there you go. Reduce the number of incentives and prizes, and use the scarcity thing, which is something that Professor Caldini will tell you all about. Scarcity drives behavioural change. So maybe there's something there. Anyway. So, scare tactics.
Yes.
Now, Maslow's pyramid. So you'll know what Maslow is, Rachel. I'm sure some of our listeners will. But those of you that don't know Maslow's theory and the pyramid, basically Maslow was around in the 1970s, came up with this sort of pyramid concept, and at the bottom you had the sort of like very basic needs of humans, and at the top you had the how would you put it?
More kind of aspirational stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Aspirational. That's right. And at the bottom, there was this thing about basically there's like survival. Okay, and I think it's one of the interesting about scare tactics is this sense that if you scare somebody, if you use fear, and the industry's been widely lambasted for using fear, uncertainty, and doubt, tapping into that thing at the bottom of the pyramid within humans to try and drive sales, for example. If you use fear, uncertainty, and doubt as scare tactics, that you're going to get people's attention. But you've got a slightly different view upon this, and I think it would be great if you could just sort of like share what you think that scare tactics don't always work.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to talk about that, because I want to say a few words about smoking. It's a topic which has interested me as a researcher for a really long time. And also I'm a former smoker as well, so I know something about how it feels to be a smoker. And it's a really great example of behaviour change, which is difficult to achieve, right? So, of course, a lot of public health organisations want people to stop smoking. And they will try all sorts of things. So, when you go to your GP, they'll, offer you, so why don't you go to we've got a lovely NHS support group that you can go to that's run by a helpful nurse. And, you can go along every Wednesday evening for the next 12 weeks as though I haven't got anything else to do on a Wednesday evening,
Right.
And then, there'll be ads on TV telling you about nicotine replacement products that aren't significantly cheaper than the cigarettes. And so these types of things will be offered to you as solutions. And of course, one of the main tactics that is used is the scare tactic. And you can see this on packs of cigarettes now with terrifying photographs of, people who've had lungs removed and things like this. Now, there's a fundamental misunderstanding here about the psychology of the smoker, which, if you think about it, becomes really simple. So let's just consider this for a moment. If you show a smoker a picture of a diseased lung, what happens? They immediately become anxious. And what happens when you make a smoker anxious? They light up. So if you wanted people to smoke, that's how you do it, right?
Yeah.
So this tactic of frightening people and producing this panicky response is going to generate the exact opposite of the desired behaviour, which I think is important, okay? So if showing people pictures of diseased lungs is not working, and clearly it's not, then we have to ask, what are the successful factors in quitting smoking? And it's a really complex topic because it's a habit that gets so ingrained in people's lifestyle. They might have been smoking for 30 years and they can't remember a time when they didn't smoke. So it's become deeply, deeply habitual and hard to change. So if we look at what produces success in quitting smoking, some of it is about intrinsic motivation, like we talked about earlier. So most smokers eventually stop. Not many people smoke to the end of their lives. And the reason that happens is because they just discover that, for their own reasons, that they want to quit smoking more than they want to continue. And that's perhaps the best way forward. However, I also want to draw attention to the work of a guy called Alan Carr, who is known to many smokers and former smokers. Now, he wasn't a doctor or a psychologist or anybody like that. He wasn't a healthcare professional. He was actually he was an accountant.
Right, okay.
Okay, and he was a very heavy smoker.
Okay.
And he had a moment of revelation one day while sitting in his car smoking and having a nosebleed. And
really, he was having a nosebleed.
He was having a nosebleed because he'd kind of wrecked his blood vessels because of smoking, and he used to suffer with nosebleeds regularly.
Okay.
His wife was worried about his health as well. She might be, and so he used to go outside and sit in his car and smoke there. And so he tells this amazing story about how one day he was doing the usual thing, sitting in his car, having a nosebleed and smoking and hating himself. And then he had this moment of clarity and revelation and quit overnight, just went from, chain smoking to zero, and then wrote some books about this revolutionary technique. And it is quite revolutionary. So I just want to draw attention to it because I think it's really important. So his moment of insight that he achieved is that he suddenly understood why people don't want to even try to quit smoking. And that's because they think it's going to be this huge, painful, horrible task that they will suffer. It'll never be over. They will just crave and miss smoking maybe for the rest of their lives. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that a very well-intentioned and supportive effort of people who will say things like, oh, well, did you know there's a quit smoking support group that you can go to? And, it's every Wednesday evening for 12 weeks. That's really reinforcing the message that this is going to be a horrible endurance test, right? Who wants to spend 12 weeks being miserable and sitting in a group of other miserable people talking about how miserable you are because you can't smoke anymore, right? It just sounds terrible. It sounds like a task that no one's going to succeed at. And so the centre of Alan Carr's message essentially is that he doesn't mince words. He says that tobacco addiction is a giant con, that you've been lied to, and it just induce, if you believe it, it will induce these feelings of learned helplessness where you come to believe that you can't do anything to rescue yourself. And so his message is that the feelings of withdrawal from tobacco are actually very slight, so slight physically that you will barely notice them. And it comes up with lots of persuasive arguments in favour of this. So he says, like when you smoke a cigarette, the nicotine will start draining out of your body immediately as soon as you step it out. And really, within a couple of hours, it's all gone. And that's during the day, that's when you feel twitchy and you start wanting another one. But then he points out that no smoker, no matter how heavily they smoked, has ever woken up during the night because of their nicotine cravings and needed to smoke. You know what I mean?
Right.
So the evidence is there that actually the amount of physical suffering involved is really not anything consequential. You can happily sleep through it. And he says, you try this out for yourself. Just don't smoke for a day, and just be consciously aware of the physical symptoms that you're experiencing, and you will realise that they are negligible. I mean, there's really nothing to write home about. And so he says, when you realise this, that when you've kind of freed yourself from the idea that you're attempting to do something difficult, which is actually an incredibly simple task, that you will once you've kind of absorbed the idea that stopping smoking is one of the easiest things you'll ever do, and that actually you will even enjoy the sensation of overcoming it. That was a revelatory message to smokers around the world, and he's got fans all over the world who will testify that they quit their heavy smoking habits overnight without any pain or unpleasant symptoms at all, and are absolutely rejoicing in their freedom, as well as the fact that they avoided months of dependency on nicotine replacement products and support groups and all of the rest of that miserable stuff that nobody really wants. So I think that's really important, that there's a message in there of it was a really, if we wanted to take a kind of psychological or even kind of NLP approach to it, we would say that he reframed the problem. He took people's beliefs about what kind of a task this is going to be and just turned it upside down and inside out and said, this is one of the most easy things you'll ever attempt. And then people were like, okay, now you're telling me something new, and this is something that I can do. Really important, right? No,
you're using the word easy, and I'm an absolute big fan of the word easy in terms of how we do things around security, sort of awareness, behaviour, and culture. The whole sense that if you can design something to be easier, then your behavioural design, in effect, you design something so that the new behaviour you want is actually easier than the old behaviour. Okay, you're more likely to get a change in behaviour. So the whole principle of easy is something I'm absolutely fully behind, and the sense that even just like you said, framing. So you're framing it, or you're anchoring this sense that people have got this anchor that's associated with giving something up, like nicotine. The frame, the picture that is painted is that it's got to be difficult, and I'm absolutely convinced that I used to smoke as well. And I went through times where I gave up, and then I sort of went back. And I remember that period of time where it always seemed I was right on edge, maybe headaches and all that sort of stuff. And then you sort of like go, yeah, but actually all these symptoms are feeling on edge. It's not unusual for most people. At some point in their lives, they feel like on edge. It could be just the workload at work. It could be a situation you find yourself in the car, being able to actually recognize it, and that's the point you make, consciously aware. It's being consciously aware of that and being able to recognize and say, yeah, okay, it's for this reason, and then okay, fine, let's just get on with it. So that there is that, and I've heard this whole consciously aware thing has been applied to other things other than smoking. And the British Computing Society had their annual congress, and I was asked to speak at it. And one of the things I pulled upon there, which was the experience in the United States when they had the service personnel returning from Vietnam, and as part of the sort of when they returned home, they went through a medical, and part of that they actually discovered that quite a few people were actually addicted in some way or other to some form of drugs.
Mm.
And they were using this on a regular basis. By regular, we're talking about daily type of basis. And you could understand why. I mean, God, in that environment, you could get it. But a year later, the number of them that had actually given up without any treatment was pretty significant. And I think that the point that came from that research, or the suggestion that came from that research, is that actually the environment within which they lived had the triggers in. And those triggers were then bringing on that sort of that framing, okay, we need to be, doing this. And I'm sure it's more complicated than that. But, when I was reading on the research, the sense was, the environment you're in will actually increase the likelihood of you pursuing that addictive behavior. If you can get yourself out of the environment you normally smoke in, I mean, the advice would, be if you have friends that smoke, then you're going to find it a lot harder to quit because it's all, it's always there. It's part of the social network type of thing. And I still remember I went away on holiday and my routine was completely broken. And I went for 14 the whole period of time, and I didn't smoke. So it's those triggers and the environment which I think is really important for the listeners to get to grips with, the sense that the environment within which people are making decisions about whether or not to comply with the policy, there will be in that environment triggers. And those triggers, when they're triggered, so to speak, are going to increase the likelihood that potentially people aren't going to choose to comply. And I think understanding the environment first and understanding that we make choices in that environment. And this comes into with the choice architecture stuff that I spoke with Dan Arley about a couple of episodes ago, is a core part of what you've got to do. And in the example that you were giving there with smoking, so that environment is also having an impact, but also it's about how you choose to interpret the messages that come from that environment that you feel. And also, the environment in a way is being framed by the fact that everybody turns around and says it's going to be painful.
Yeah, that's right. I think this is so important. And also you raised something really interesting there as well about misattributions of negative feelings, which is to say that when smokers feel anxious, they think it's because they need a cigarette. And they perhaps, especially if they've been smokers for a long time, fail to realise how many people, perhaps most people who, live in the Western world and have to go to a job every single day, I'm going to say most people feel anxious a lot of the time. It's a normal state it's a normal feeling. It's perfectly explicable. If you have a job that you have to go to each day, of course you feel anxious, So I think that smokers kind of in the habit of thinking that because there's a very short-term cause and effect, in the sense that you feel anxious, you have a cigarette, and for about a minute you'll feel slightly better. There's a kind of misattribution of the problem there. So I think that's a really interesting factor as well that probably is worth paying more attention to.
Yeah. So I think the other thing which has come up in the conversations that we've had is this idea that in trying to get people to do things, okay, you can tell them not to do it, or you can tell them not to do it and explain why.
Yeah.
Right. So, as security professionals, we might be saying, okay, this is what you don't do. Okay, or this is what you do, which is another point we'll come on to, I'm sure, a little bit later on. This is what you don't do. And then increasingly what the industry side realises is, we have to explain why. Now, you think that this might be a very British phenomena. And you've got an example, which I think is an absolutely fantastic example. Do you want to share it with us?
Yeah, it's really nice. This was somebody I kind of slightly know through social media. And she's American, and she's currently living in the north of England because her husband's job required them to move here. Uh-huh. And so as an American expat, she's full of insight about differences between the UK and the US, right?
All right, yeah.
And she said, something I've noticed is that British signs often give a reason for an instruction. So they will say, do not block driveway, drive is in constant use. Or no swimming, strong currents. And she kind of interestedly contrasted this against American science, which just give to the instruction and don't give a reason.
Right.
And I thought there was a really nice insight in there, in the sense that she kind of really responded to it as a difference and observed the effect on her own behaviour, which is that she felt much more willing to cooperate when the instruction explained why you're supposed to be doing this thing. And it's kind of, there's a lot of common sense in there as well, right? Anybody who is listening, who is a parent, knows from their own experience that kids respond far better to instructions if you explain why. Kids hate being ordered around with no explanation of the reason behind the order.
Yeah.
But I think that we sometimes forget this when we're trying to change the behaviour of adults. But it's just the same with adults, you know.
Yeah.
I think there's got so many examples of that in the workplace. You know, if you just tell people, oh, there's a new policy, you've got to fill out the paperwork in a different way now, or you can only take your lunch at this time, or, you know, you've got to do this or that, and you don't explain why, about 50% of people are just going to feel annoyed and pushed around and do what they can to avoid following the instruction. If you give a plausible reason why that needs to happen, then you're in a much better situation.
I think it's really interesting. Now, I've got to beg, because people will go like North America or, you know, United States and the UK, and they go Western cultural, surely there's similarities. And I would go, do you know, actually, having worked from a very cultural perspective, you know, in that environment, I've come to realise there are some really strong differences. And you actually go to the United States, and whether you're East Coast, West Coast, you know, on a border with Canada, on a border with Mexico, there are some really stark differences even on that level within, when it's such a huge, it's such a huge landmass and such a big population. And it does make me wonder whether which part of the United States that she actually came from, your friends, and it's like, yeah, and is one better than the other? Does that direct "don't swim" sign, is that suited to the yes compared to, you know, having the "don't swim" strong currents that your friend identified here here in the UK? And because part of me chuckles because I'm like, yeah, we do tend to, and it's almost like it's a bit of a British thing, you know. We have to explain ourselves.
I don't know. I think this is a good tactic, and the reason I think that is because, firstly, I believe in this kind of ethnographic experience that she's having, okay, where she's moved here as somebody who's not a British native and is experiencing lots of aspects of British culture for the first time. And finds herself pleasantly surprised and feeling more cooperative when she's confronted with these British signs that say, do this or don't do this, and here's why. So I'm kind of persuaded by the sort of authenticity of that experience. Yeah. But also a little bit of more of context as well is that her husband is serving in the military.
Right.
Now, in the military, time is of the essence, okay? Mm-hmm. And there simply is not time to give a rationale for every single order. Yeah. Okay? So her husband regularly will take orders and follow orders with no accompanying explanation. Yeah. And that's perfectly necessary and required for him in order to be able to do his job effectively. The army cannot work in any other way. But for her, she said, you know, this is a reason why I could never be in the army, because people just shouting instructions at me with no explanation of why I'm supposed to do this thing, that's not going to fly. You see what I mean? So I think that what I'm hearing here is something that sounds quite believable. You know, she's really thought about it. Yeah. In light of the experience she's had in the US and then here. And so I can, I'm prepared to take that on board as something which sounds like a plausible experience, you know? And
it's interesting when, you know, I was doing some reading. I was reading a book by David Halpern, and he wrote a book called Inside the Nudge Unit. And as part of that, he was talking about how during David Cameron's, that's the ex-UK Prime Minister's time in office, they just sort of developed this nudge unit. Mm-hmm. And as part of kicking that off, they'd invited over Robert Cialdini, I think Professor Robert Cialdini. And one of the things that he said very quickly, he was looking at some examples of the ways that we try to sort of educate people on policy, government policy, was the fact that you turn around saying, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do that, you don't do that. And Cialdini came back and said, he was basically saying that is like a core principle that you never say don't. If you focus on the don'ts, okay, instead of the do's, people are much more, they just get turned off by the don'ts. Where you do this, and this is what you do, and this is what you do. It's just a change in the language and also the tone, because don't has this negative thing going, don't. And you're right, as children from a young age, you probably get don't said to you quite a lot.
Yes.
Okay. And children will probably turn around and probably think and see that as a negative thing. You get this feeling, don't. You get told off. And I think that's quite interesting from a cultural thing. Most of our cultural stuff is developed at a really early age. So the whole way that we see don't is a very negative context, whereas they do is a very positive context. So what do people want to? What are people more likely to engage with, to respond to?
That's also a really nice insight. Yeah, it's kind of infantilizing, isn't it? To have somebody tell you, don't do that.
Yeah.
Well, I can decide what to do for myself. Thanks very much.
I'm a grown adult. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think it's a great example. And it might highlight the differences between the two different cultures. And I think the point that you make as well is about, what's suitable for the armed forces is actually very different to what's suitable for working in Civvy Street, for example.
Exactly, because if you try and the armed forces work the way they need to work, okay, and the army knows how to run itself, and I would never be so presumptuous as to argue with that. They clearly know what they're doing. However, for your average person who's working in a sort of white collar office job or whatever, there's going to be a powerful sense of this is not what I signed up for. Okay, I expect to be taken seriously and respected as an adult, and I did not sign up to be pushed around and spoken to as though I haven't got a brain. And, people want to feel respected. And I think that giving it some sort of plausible explanation for why you need them to do this thing has got to be more helpful. And most people feel like you are taking them seriously, not just being bossy.
But it doesn't always work, does it? Because I think you just use a beautiful phrase there, this isn't what I signed up for. Okay, but use it within the context of somebody that's working outside of the the armed forces, and actually on a people that join the armed forces sign up for something.
Exactly. You know what you're getting into. It's a whole microcultural by itself, isn't it?
Yeah. But there are examples where people don't follow the rules, where. I can think of in my industry, there are a couple of people that, events that have happened which have been considered security events where people have not complied with policy, which have really, involved national security. And it's caused all manner of debate because that individual had signed up for something, but they found themselves in a situation where they no longer felt that situation was what they signed up for. And it's interesting because it gets to a value at some point. The audience are going to sit there and there's going to be a clash of values between themselves and what they thought they signed up for and actually what the reality sometimes has to be, because of a particular environment. And, the name that comes straight to my mind is Snowden.
Okay.
And there are others as well who have all found themselves in that position where they've got to point and they've turned around and go, this isn't what I signed up for. And then they sort of, their values, and then it comes down to the role of values. And for me, I think the point I guess I can get into here is you should never ever underestimate the role of values in how people will actually make judgments and decisions, even where they're aware of something and that generally they have in the past, behaved, the whole values piece, which brings us back to, for me, values are a core part of culture. And, for me, that cultural piece and understanding values is something that semiotics is really focused upon. It's about understanding those differences. And I think that nicely ties the loop in the end of this interview, actually, because we're back to your favourite topic of semiotics.
Absolutely. So Can I take a minute to offer some action points for putting together some messages that will perhaps have a better chance of changing people's behaviour?
Yeah.
All right, good. Okay, so thanks so much, everybody, for putting up with me talking on for hours. Let's here's a based on my own research experience and sort of knowledge of semiotics. Here's a short list of things that you can do when you are putting together communications that you hope are going to change the behaviour of your staff or of the public. All right.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. So number one, be focused on the results that you want. Don't be the guys who made a beautiful TV ad that nobody can remember what it was for. Okay. Okay. It's crucial in sales. There's got to be a call to action. You need to make it very clear what it is you want people to do as a result of your message. Mm-hmm. Okay. Number two, give people a good solid reason why you are asking for this behaviour. Unless you're in the army, we need to assume that people are not going to like being ordered around or given instructions that they don't think are worthwhile. So if you can, give people a reason why you're telling them this. Thirdly, let's learn from the blood donors and try to create a sense of a team which is rewarding to join. Those blood donors were motivated by a sense that we can save the whole world when we all act together. And there's something incredibly kind of uplifting in that, which is good to replicate. Number four, let's make the problem seem like something which can be overcome. This is quite important. You see it a lot in charity advertising, where it's been kind of pretty much proven that, if you show people a picture of one starving person, that's highly motivating in producing charity donations. If you tell people this whole country is experiencing a famine, then they give up. They'll say, oh, well, we can't ever fix this problem. There's too many people. It's too big. I can't do anything about it. Yeah. So we need to make the problems seem like something which can be changed as a result of people's individual effort. Yeah. I think don't waste too much of your budget on the small cash incentives. Do some research amongst the minority of people who are already doing what you want them to do and find out what their intrinsic motivators are. Those people have already come up with a reason for being compliant. Find out what that reason is and use it to compose your messages. Yeah. Okay, and finally, if we're going to learn from Alan Carr and his smoking cessation, where you can, reframe the problem, okay? Don't tell depressing or scary stories that emphasise how terribly difficult this is going to be. People have heard it before. They don't like feeling depressed and scared. So just reframe the problem, shake it up. Show them that all these negative aspects they thought they were going to deal with miraculously go away when you look at the problem from another angle. It's not going to be difficult. Success is going to come easily. It will make you feel amazing, and you'll almost feel like it's unnecessary when people congratulate you. And if people want an example, I really want to recommend Alan Carr's books on smoking. They are full of joy and life, and they just turn everything that smokers have been encouraged to believe about smoking upside down. And they're a terrific example of how to reframe difficult problems.
Awesome. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much for that. That's a really good summary of the call that we just had. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rachel. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Okay, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye. Hi. Well, she had to be good to get her back on Series 2, having been on Series 1. In between Series 1 and Series 2, Rachel and I have actually had quite a few conversations. And every time I seem to talk to her, I don't think I could be amazed by the energy she has. It's listening to her. When I take time to listen to her, you start to see connections with other areas of all the research that I've done. I think that's one of the most exciting lessons for me, is seeing how all these disciplines actually all ultimately connect. And if you have the time to see the bigger picture, you start to see the similarities, you start to see the threads which start coming through. And that's one of the experiences when I speak to Rachel, I start to see these threads forming. And so it's great to have her back on the show again. If you enjoyed the show, and I hope that you did, and you'd like to know how to stay in contact with the show and how to know more about what we're doing at Rethinking the Human Factor, what is the best way to do that? Well, probably if you go to the Marmalade Box website, so that's www.marmaladebox.com/podcast, on that page, there are a number of ways that you can stay in contact with the show. That's like being informed about when the next podcast has been published. Another way of sort of staying in contact and not missing out on any of the really interesting content that we're generating is, if you're on LinkedIn anyway, to go to the Rethinking the Human Factor LinkedIn group and put in a request to join the group. We do a lot of stuff on that group, but the thing that you'll be mainly interested in right now is getting a heads up on what the next podcast is going to be, and also being told when the podcast has been published. But also in that group, we talk about pieces of research that we're doing, pieces of research that we've stumbled across that other people have done. And we like to sort of use that as a means of generating a discussion amongst the group. So yeah, that's one way you can stay in contact with what we're doing. If you really like the content of the podcast, and if you've had time to read my own book called Rethinking the Human Factor as well, and you're like, okay, how do I bring this to life in my own organization? Well, there's a number of ways that you can do that. We run a number of workshops and training courses, which you can find information about on the Marmalade Box /training page on the website. And we run those currently all around the UK and a number of places in Europe, but we're also in discussions to bring that as a result of conversations we've had with people over in North America and also in Australia. So, if you're a North American listener and you're interested in, having us do a trip out to North America, just drop us an email, podcast@re-thinkingthehumanfactor.com. Let us know what it is that you would be interested in. And if you're over in Australia, then I'll just tell you now that we're already talking to some people, and we really hope that we can get over to Australia at some point later on this year. Right. So I always appreciate the fact that people give time to listen to the podcast, to listen to what the debate we're trying to cause. I hope that you're finding it of interest. And if you do find it of interest, please give us a rating if you can. It's lovely to see that, but it's more importantly, it's lovely to be able to share that with the team here, because whilst I'm the voice of the podcast, at the end of the day, it wouldn't happen without the other people in the team actually taking the raw material away in terms of the conversations I have and editing them to a degree and leveling all the sounds out and then actually doing the artworks and everything else. They're a wonderful team. And it's always great to be able to say to them, look, you're doing an amazing job. And then pointing them towards not just the feedback I give them, but also the feedback that you as listeners give as well. I look forward to being able to share some really interesting insights with an absolutely fantastic guest in a fortnight's time. And in the meantime, if you've got any questions around the human factor, then please do get in contact. Many thanks.